was a very, very special grad. Whenever I talk about the topic of anger, I always realize that at some point I have to talk about abuse. And as soon as I think of talking about abuse, I feel this internal caution, because I know that for most of the people coming out of a trauma, not only were they abused as children, but many of them ended up in abusive relationships. And so I feel the need to talk about this and explain it and to give tools to people who have been in that or who don't want to go back into that or who are in it right now and wanting to get out but aren't sure how. But I'm very cautious in talking about it because I know it will stir up stuff for people. And so I want this to be a place where you can be safe, and if stuff is stirred up, that you would feel that you can talk to somebody that would just provide you some help right away so that you aren't going out here with a lot of stuff stirred up and then relapsing or making decisions that you'll later regret. So I want to begin by just giving you some introductory info about this topic of abuse. A study was done that said that 1 out of 3 women that end up in emergency end up there because of abuse. So that's to say that it is a big problem in our society, especially in the world of complex trauma and addiction. It is a very common occurrence. One of the things that I feel the need to emphasize when I teach this is many people think only of men abusing women, but the other is also true. There are many cases of women who abuse the men, and so that needs to be considered as well. The next thing is, when we talk about abuse, in my mind, there's a spectrum or degrees of abuse from severe abuse to more mild abuse. They're all in the abuse spectrum. And why I say that is because some people think if I haven't been in the severe end of the spectrum, then I don't have abuse issues. When they really could be living right now in abuse, they're just not realizing it because it's not of the very severe nature. I think a lot of people that come out of complex trauma end up in abuse, but they don't think it's abuse because it feels like normal to them. This is what their family was like growing up. And so they have the wrong measuring stick to evaluate whether something is abuse. Another thing that I see with a lot of people is they think that abuse is basically sexual or physical abuse. And they go, I wasn't sexually abused or physically abused, so I must not have abuse. Not true. Other thing that people do all the time that I work with is they listen to clients talk about the severe abuse that they've gone through, and they go, well, mine's not as bad as theirs, so it must not be a big deal worth talking about. So what I want to do tonight is really help you understand abuse and the subtleties of abuse, so that we're going to go from the very obvious forms of abuse to the not so obvious, and hopefully that'll give you an understanding of it. Next week, I want to deal with the tools that you need in dealing with abuse or getting out of abusive relationships. So let me give you a few more things just to get us moving in understanding abuse. I think a lot of people have said to me over the years, yes, I was abused, but I don't think it affected me. And that is common. And so part of what we're going to do tonight is to show how it affected you. And again, that might begin to stir up stuff. So I want you to be aware of that. The next thing that I find as I broach this subject, and it's part of why I'm cautious, is that people, when they hear I'm going to talk about abuse, they feel this internal fear. And it's almost like, uh-oh, I'm afraid to go there, because I'm afraid if I go there, I'm going to look at some stuff I don't want to look at. And if I start looking at that stuff, it's going to bring up painful emotions that might be just overwhelming for me. And I might just lose it, and I'm afraid of it. And so their response usually at that point, once they start to listen to it and get stuff stirred up, is they go, shut her down. I'm going to run out of here. I can't feel this. I can't deal with that. So what I want to say to you right up front is this. We're stirring up potentially stuff in a place where you can get support. So it's not that you can't go through it. It's that you need to change in your mind your action plan. In the past, your only solution was flight. But now you're able to say, no, I don't have to do that one, and I don't have to shut her down and freeze. I could actually reach out for help and begin to talk about it and find healing and help in all of that. The next thing that a lot of people do when they're confronted with their abuse is their brain subconsciously begins to spout off arguments as to why they don't need to listen or why they don't need to look at it. So they go, oh, the past is the past. Nothing I can do about it. No point even thinking about it. And their brain goes there. Or, like I said, it doesn't affect me today. But all of that those are forms of denial. And what I'm hoping is that as you get rid of those arguments or those defense mechanisms and let yourself get honest, that you will begin to enter into the admission that, yes, there was abuse, and I really would benefit from healing from all of that. Other responses around abuse that people have is, I don't want to talk about it or admit it because that would be ratting out my family or my partner. And I have a sense of loyalty that I can't make them look bad. I can't let out the secrets, so I can't talk about this. And what you find is that if you keep those secrets and don't talk, that it just begins to kill you more and more. It is a toxic, toxic thing inside of you. I think another response of some people is, there's a statement that is not true for everybody, but it is what we call a truism. It's true of many, and it goes like this. Abused people, when they come into adult life, so people of complex trauma, they now fear danger. You get that. But there's another fear in many of them, and that is that they will become dangerous to others. And if you look at the research, it would say that those who have been abused, there's a good chance that when they get older, that they will have an inclination to become abusive. Doesn't mean they will, doesn't mean they have to, doesn't mean it's their fate, but it is a tendency because that's what they've learned. And so a lot of people are afraid to start being honest because the fear is if I get honest, then that might just bring all of this anger up and then I might become abusive. So the answer to not becoming abusive is never deal with it. Again, that doesn't work. Another thing that potentially gets stirred up is you're not just looking at how you were abused, but you begin to go, oh my goodness, I abused my kids. And then lots of guilt comes up. And so be prepared for that. And again, talk to somebody about it. One other thing that comes up is this. When I begin talking about abuse, a lot of you are going to feel like a football in your stomach. And so there's going to be this permission that I'm giving that you talk to somebody and you go to somebody and you blurt it all out. And then you go home that night and you go, oh, I said too much. Okay, I can never talk about that again. I'm so embarrassed. And you then just stuff everything right back down. So I want you to be prepared that that might happen. So the first time you talk about it, you feel guilty afterwards. And then you determine not to talk about it anymore. I hope you can get through that and continue the healing journey. So let's begin with the types of abuse. And I want to begin with a very simple thing. Abuse is one of two things. Something negative being inflicted on you and something positive being withheld from you. So something negative inflicted on you, something positive that you should have got but didn't. It was withheld from you. Both of those are forms of abuse. When you break that down, the most familiar types are physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal, emotional, and spiritual. We talk about those all the time. But it goes further. There's also financial abuse. Women can have female roles, so you have to raise the kids, cook the meals, do housework. That's a woman's role, and that can be an abusive thing. There's abandonment, bullying, teasing, withholding from you what you want the most, or a threat. When I talk about withholding from you what you want the most, it's one of the most cruelest types of abuse. So if you had a dad who was like this, and he knew you really wanted to play baseball, and you begged him and cried and pleaded and tried to bargain, and dad knew this is the deepest longing and desire of their heart, the way I can hurt them the most is not give it to them. And so that is kind of the ultimate in cruelty. That is an emotional piece. Another type of abuse is if you were abused, let's say by a bully or sexually abused by a neighbor or cousin, and you told your parents or your siblings about it, but they didn't do nothing, they did nothing, or they didn't believe you. Or they told you that you were making it up, or they took the side of the abuser and said you must have done something wrong to get that to happen to you. That is abuse being added to the initial abuse. And that just makes it double painful. Another piece is if you did talk to somebody and they acknowledged it, but they didn't comfort you, they just said, toughen up, smarten up, get over it, be a man, and then nobody comforted you or was there to nurture you. That is another type of abuse. Then, one other one, public humiliation. It goes out of the family setting into a public thing where you are embarrassed in front of a lot of people. So people that would pull down your pants at school in public, gang rapes, or you pee your pants and you get told, everybody gets told about it, and it's written on walls, etc. Those are all abuse. The problem with some of those is it's not just one person. You might not even know who the abuser is, but you sure feel the abuse. Okay, with that as just some examples, let me go now into a definition. So a basic definition is when somebody in a position of power or authority, or somebody who is physically stronger than you, uses their position or their power to hurt you or control you. So that abuse is about a powerful person abusing their power and hurting you or controlling you and being selfish. So that is a basic definition. Now, I included two charts in there. This is one of the most common ones around abuse. The power and control is at the center, and then it goes out into all of the spokes of the wheel as to the different areas of abuse and the different tactics to maintain the power and control. Then the next one on the right side are the types of abuse, and on the left side are the tools that they use to control you, the control tactics. So they might use your property or your pets. They might damage them, threaten them, kill them, hurt them as a way to manipulate and control you or hurt you. They might stalk you. They might use your relationships and cut you off from all the people in your life, or they might use your own children as a way to threaten you or control you or hurt you, or they try to produce isolation. So those are very helpful summaries of the types of control tactics and the types of abuse. So you can go through that at your own leisure. Now I want to take this definition and break it down even to finer, more subtle types of abuse, okay? So we're going to make a distinction here. Do you realize that any treatment that violates love or violates respect, justice, truth, trust, safety, or security, any event is an abusive event. So anytime a person disrespects you, anytime a person tells a lie to you, that is an abusive action, okay? Now, that doesn't mean you're in an abusive relationship. That doesn't mean you're living in abuse, but I want you to understand that that act is an abusive act. So what makes an abusive relationship or abusive environment is when you live in ongoing violations of love, truth, justice, respect, etc. So make that distinction. Those one-time events are abuse events, but to be an abusive relationship, it has to become a common part of that relationship. Let me take that further. Any relationship where you feel like a prisoner who has no free will and somebody else is controlling you and you feel you have to conform to what they want, and they can treat you with lack of love, justice, truth, respect, etc., and you can't get out of that at that moment in time, now you are a prisoner in an abusive environment. So you are in a place where you can't get out of, where you're being mistreated, and you have to conform to survive. That is abuse. Another way to say that is if you're in an environment where you are made to feel less than human. So in other words, way to say that is you're in an environment where you are feeling used as a commodity. So you're just your partner's free prostitute, and that's how they see you, as their sex machine. You don't feel loved. You don't feel valued outside of that particular area. Or you are their trophy on their arm when they go out, but it's all about their image. So you are feeling used. You're not feeling like you are a human being that is valued for who you are. You feel that you are a useful commodity to somebody else. That is actually abuse. You're in an abusive environment. So this is what I mean by we're breaking it down into the more subtle things. Another one, if you are made to feel less than, that you, or in other words, you don't matter. So you are constantly disrespected and made to feel that you're stupid, that you're no good, that you're lazy. All of those things make you feel less than. That's an abusive environment. So all of us will experience people at one time or another that make us feel less than on one or two occasions. But an abusive relationship is where you're made to feel less than regularly. And it doesn't necessarily mean have to be just what they say to you or how they treat you. You sense their attitude toward you, that they see you as less than. So it's being in an environment of disrespect, of not being valued. Let me take it a little bit further. Back to a child's age. If you as a child were expected to respect your parents, but your parents never modeled respect for you, you were being asked to do something you weren't given any roadmap for. Respect us. We don't have to respect you, and we're not even going to teach you how to respect, but you should know how to do that, and if you don't, we're going to punish you. That is abuse. If you're expected to know everything, to know the answers, but nobody taught you anything, that is abuse. If you were punished for not knowing something that was never taught to you. If you were made to feel responsible for other people's choices and then were punished for their bad choices, that is abuse. If you, summary, are in an environment where you have to be on guard, you can't relax, you can't drop your guard, that is abuse. So another way to say all of that is everybody in complex trauma has been in an abusive environment. They either have had negative inflicted on them or positive withheld from them. Neglect, abandonment, or abuse, all of those things are complex trauma, but it all comes under the abuse umbrella. So let me then say, does it really matter that we look at this? Does abuse make much of a difference in a person's life? Well, if you've grown up in it, you know you do. It does. And if you're living in it, you know that it does. So I want to talk about the results of abuse. But just to set up that, let me give you something that I hope will just bring part of this at a deeper level of understanding to you. If you have been in an abusive relationship, every time there's abuse that's either physical, verbal, or emotional, you are made to feel less than. You're told you're lucky you have me, nobody else would want you, and all of those things. You're told you're stupid, you're fat, all of that stuff. Every time you take that, it takes your self-image and makes it smaller. You hang into the relationship, you don't leave it, and the next time it happens, it makes your self-image even smaller. And every time you're in that cycle, your self-image gets smaller, smaller, smaller. And what you don't realize is your self-worth or your self-image is gradually being worn down until you get to the point where you believe what you're hearing. And you think, I wouldn't be able to survive outside of here. Nobody else would want me. So the long-term effect or the long-term consequence of staying in abuse is it keeps you so you make a prisoner of yourself and don't leave it because you don't think you can. So it takes your internal strength or your internal backbone and it crushes it. And it makes you with no backbone or weak that you feel you could not survive on your own. Another thing that's happening in that is this whole shame thing. So I think the main consequence, negative consequence of abuse is it produces this shame. I'm not good enough. I'm less than. I'm not lovable or valuable. Abuse is somebody else doesn't respect you. The consequence is you start not respecting yourself. And once you get to the point where you don't respect yourself at all, you are in a very dangerous place that's very hard to get out of. So the more severe the abuse, the louder the shame message that you are nothing. And so the goal of many abusers is to wear your self-worth down to zero so that they have total control of your thinking, your behavior, your perception on life. You take everything from them, and then they have total control, but you've gradually given it to them as they've worn down your self-worth and deepened your shame. With that is another consequence, which is you believe more and more lies. So with abuse, you're told you're fat, ugly, nobody wants you, and you gradually believe that. You're told you're unlovable, and you gradually believe that. But if you had sexual abuse, it will add a lie that potentially says this: my greatest value as a human being is my body. Or my greatest value as a human being is my ability to perform sexually. That's all I'm good for. That lie can shape your entire approach to life. And that can do tremendous damage to yourself and to your future relationships. The other lies are all about life, about relationships, don't trust, wear masks, all of those things. Be in control is the only way to stay safe. Learn to manipulate, lie after lie. So abuse is a greenhouse for growing destructive, toxic lies that you believe yourself, and they shape everything you do. Third consequence of abuse, you're experiencing somebody else's anger, but you can't do anything about it. So you have all kinds of anger in response that you can't do anything about. So you usually have to suppress it or stuff it down, or you learn to find something weaker than you and lash out at that. And that's where that statement I said at the beginning, that abused people tend to end up abusing, and it's partly because there's all this pent-up anger inside that is looking to get vented on something. And that is the danger. Next one, abuse causes your main emotion in life to be fear, which is also anxiety. So you live in fear every day. Will I get an explosion today? Will they lash out at me today? And fear guides all that you do. And then you fear outside relationships. Will they figure out what's going on? What do I say if they ask me questions? And fear takes over more and more. And so usually anxiety disorders begin to develop in people who have been abused. Next one is it makes you less and less human. And I've kind of talked about this, but think about it this way. For many people, they got abused because they showed weakness. So they cried, and then they got made fun of for crying. They showed fear, and they got made fun of for showing fear. So what they began to realize, never show weakness. If you show weakness, you give them something to use against you in an abusive way. And so they had to shut down certain emotions. They had to shut down the parts of their personality that they thought made them weak. And then, before they knew it, they were turning into a robot. They could do all the right actions, they just didn't feel anything anymore, and they didn't show most of their personality. So abuse will take you as a person and make you less and less a person until you're basically a walking robot. The next response or consequence of abuse is it begins to put in you the need to cope. But if you can't escape physically from the abuse, you have to escape other ways. So you escape through a fantasy life. And you develop ways of just going off and imagining a perfect family, a perfect relationship, a relationship where you're valued and cherished and loved. And that becomes your imagination, your daydream area that you like to escape to. Some, if they had a lot of abuse as a child, they had to actually split as a person. So they could imagine themselves on the ceiling looking down as if it was happening to somebody else. So their brain, out of a desire to protect them, began to go into extreme splintering things to break off so that they didn't feel the pain of what they were going through. And then the greatest way of escape became the addiction. Then you didn't feel, then you had good feelings, all of those things. That's what you have to now deal with. So it sets up all the wrong ways of coping. They seem to help in the moment, but they actually have made life very, very difficult. Another thing that's a consequence that is really important to understand is if you grew up with abuse, there's something inside of you that is drawn to relationships that typically will end up abusive. Not every case, but what you have to understand, if you grew up with abuse, that feels like normal. There's a certain amount of chaos and drama and excitement and intensity with abusive relationships. And without realizing it, something in you has that on your radar that you're looking for and are attracted to is relationships where you will be abused again. Now, here's the cycle that I see. You come out of abuse and you go, I'm never getting in another relationship that's abusive, and I'm not even sure I'm going to get in a relationship, period. So you get all your walls in place, and nobody's getting past your walls. You don't trust anybody. You've made that very clear to yourself, okay? What you're not factoring in is this. You still long for love. And that longing for love is actually more powerful than your commitment to maintain your walls. So as soon as you find somebody that seems to be the solution to your longing for love, you're cautious at first, but they're going to give you their best behavior. They're going to love bomb you. They're going to treat you like a princess or a prince, and your walls are going to come down. And guess what? They abuse you. And so what I have seen happen over and over again is people come out of abuse, say, I'm not trusting anybody, I'm not having a relationship. They just don't factor in how deeply they long to be loved. And as soon as they meet Mr. Perfect in their mind, everything changes, and they end up in a relationship way too fast, and then they get abused again. Let me end with this, the cycle of abuse. I went through this from the perspective of the cycle of unresolved anger. This is now putting it in the cycle of abuse. And they're basically almost identical. But if you weren't here, what happens is you have the acute explosion at the top. So the abuse takes place. After that, you go into the honeymoon phase. So that usually is, after the abuse, there's remorse, there's, I'm sorry, I never do that again, and then they're on their best behavior. And everybody is super sweet and super nice to each other. Now, what you have to understand, at the center of this whole thing is a circle that says denial. And what that means is nobody is being honest about their issues. So what happened was, when they abused you, they told you that it was your fault. They blamed you for their anger, and they're denying their stuff. Then when they are sorry afterwards, what they typically say is, I just had a bad day. It's all the stress of my life. So they're blaming something, but they're still not owning the depth of their issues. There's still denial. And so as they go through the honeymoon, and everybody's on best behavior, and you're enjoying time together, that reinforces the denial, because then you go, it must have just been a bad day, because look how well we're doing. We've gone for 2 weeks where everybody's just lovey-dovey. It's beautiful. We don't have deep issues. We just had a bad day. The problem is, the honeymoon is on, but there's little issues that are happening. Little annoyances, little problems from the underneath stuff that nobody's talking about, and tension starts to build. Because nobody wants to talk about it, because if we talk about it, it might end up in a fight, and that will end the honeymoon. So let's just keep denying that there's problems and let the tension build. And the tension builds and builds and builds until there's an explosion. Now, what you need to understand about this diagram is every time you go through that cycle, the cycle gets a little bit shorter. It doesn't take quite as long until the next explosion. And then doesn't take long till the next explosion. Next point, every time you go through the cycle, the honeymoon gets shorter until there's no honeymoon at all. And next one, every time you go through the cycle, your self-esteem gets a little bit lower. So it's not just that you're going through a cycle, is the cycle is changing as you go through it, and it's changing you. So that's an introduction to abuse. Hopefully it gives you an understanding. If it has stirred up some stuff, please talk to a friend. about it. With this anger series, I've been telling you Bible stories about anger, and I thought tonight I would take that in a little different direction to talking about being angry at God. Now, for some people, as soon as they hear somebody say being angry at God, they go, oh, no, you can't do that. That would be bad. You'd be in big trouble. And what's interesting as I thought about this over the years is if you listen to all the rest of this series on anger, what have I said over and over again? Don't stuff it, resolve it. What are many people doing when they feel anger towards God? Stuffing it and not resolving it. So they're doing the very thing we're not doing in any other relationship, but somehow in that relationship, we feel it's all right to stuff it, or we're bad if we don't. And so I want to talk about that because every relationship, there will be anger. Every relationship, there will be conflict. That's the reality of relationships. We don't always agree. We can hurt each other. Now, the thing with God is it's even more so because he's never wrong. And so we can't blame him, though we can try. And he's invisible. So we get angry, and what do we do with all of that? I think if you've been in a relationship with God and you've been honest about it, you've had times where you've been in an unjust situation, so something bad is happening to one of your kids or to yourself, and you've prayed to God saying, please stop it, please do something, and he doesn't do anything, and you're angry because you're watching your kid get hurt or yourself. Or you're in a situation where you have a significant problem, it's a legitimate problem, and you really, really, really need God's help, and you pray and beg him to help, and he doesn't seem to help. It seems like he sits on his hands, and as a result, you're confused. I thought it was a loving God. You're feeling betrayed, like if he's a loving God, this is no way to treat somebody you love. And so anger might start to creep in. And what you find often is that God seems a bit like your grumpy, angry dad who didn't get involved and didn't correct bad problems and unfair problems and just let you exist in it and didn't lift a finger to help you. And you go, God, you're starting to sound like an abusive parent. And so you're getting angry about that. So then you share that at church with somebody and you get told you're a bad Christian, you should never be angry at God, etc., and then you feel guilty. But nothing gets resolved. So I want to talk about it, and I want you to see what the Bible actually does say about feeling angry at God. Because the reality is, as I said, every one of us is going to struggle with anger at God on occasion in our life. And maybe on many occasions in our life, because God doesn't act the way we expect him to or want him to on many occasions. So the first thing that I want you to see is, as you read the Bible, you read that the greatest, most godly people expressed their emotions. They expressed their hurt toward God. They expressed their anger toward God, their confusion, their pain. And I want you to read that, and I hope it will help you to understand God wants a real relationship with you. So that if you're struggling with him, it's not a bad thing at all to be honest with him about how you're feeling and to get angry even with him. So let me begin Psalm 13. So the book of Psalms, it was Israel's songbook, but it contained all kinds of poems that were originally part of journals for David. And we've been looking at David, and it became journals included from other people as well, but David was one of the main contributors. So here's what he says. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? So he's struggling, and it feels that God has forgot all about him. And many of you can relate to that. How long will you hide your face from me? In other words, I'm trying to find you, and you're hiding. I can't find you. And it seems like you don't want to be found, that you're purposely hiding from you. How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? In other words, God, I've been struggling for days. I'm asking for help and you're not helping. How long do I have to sit in this struggle? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord, my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I will overcome him. My foes will rejoice when I fall. In other words, he's saying, God, I've been praying, and you're not doing nothing. My enemies are winning. This is getting serious. If you don't do something soon, I'm afraid I might even die. So he's desperate, but you feel the confusion. You can feel the hurt. I thought you cared. I thought you were a loving God. I thought you wanted to help. Where are you? Honest expression. Next one. My God, why have you abandoned me? In other words, I thought you were my best friend. I thought you were a loving parent who was there for me. It's like you dropped me off on the doorstep of some place and you've abandoned me. And you can just feel the pain. Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night I lift my voice, but I find no relief. That is a hurting, confused, upset person, but he's able to say it honestly to God. Next one. How long, O Lord, will you look on and do nothing? Now you can start to detect some anger there. Rescue me from their fierce attacks. Protect my life from these lions, but you're doing nothing. And I'm kind of mad about that. And so for many people, again, God starts to feel like an abusive parent who doesn't care, who is neglecting, not answering, not being there to support or love or help. And that is what God begins to feel like. Another one. Oh God, my rock, I cry. Why have you forgotten me? Why must I wander around in grief, oppressed by my enemies? Their taunts break my bones, they scoff. Where is this God of yours? So not only am I noticing that you're not answering and it's hurting me, but even my enemies are knowing that you're not doing nothing. You're not answering, and they're mocking me that your God doesn't care because he's not helping you. And that's adding to the pain and frustration that I'm feeling. Next one, Job. Job was a guy who had a bunch of children, and they all died on the same day in a terrible storm. His wife was remaining. She didn't die, and I think maybe at times he wished she had, because she became a nag. And she got angry, and she lashed out at him. She lashed out at God. She became a bitter, bitter woman. And Job had to live with that on top of the grief of losing his children. Not only did he lose his children, but the storm wiped out his business as well. And then people plundered, and he lost all his wealth. So he lost everything. And then he got very sick. And he was sitting with this disease that nobody knew what it was. And all we're told is that black boils began to come on his body that were pussy and itchy. And he couldn't sleep because he's in so much pain. And then he had 3 friends who came to comfort him. And they kept saying to him, you must have done something really bad because God's really punishing you. Not comfort at all. So Job is all by himself with no support, everybody judging him, everybody criticizing him, feeling overwhelming pain, and he's saying to God, where are you? He's calling out. And so in chapter 10 he says, does it please you, God, to oppress me? Is that why there's no relief for this illness? Does it please you to spurn the very things you create while you smile on all of the schemes of the wicked? So Job, we're told, was the one person in the world who was more righteous than anybody else. He was sold out to God more than anybody else. And what does it pay you to be sold out to God? You lose everything and live in pain. Look at the drug dealers and all these people that are dishonest business people and abusive people. They're getting rich and prospering, and here I am with nothing but bad happening. What is going on, God? And he is confused. Then he says, surely, O God, you have worn me out. You have devastated my entire household. I don't know if you've ever said as a parent to your kids, you guys are wearing me out. And that means I'm down to one nerve and you're standing on it. And that's not going to get pretty from here on, because I am running out of resources to handle this. And he's saying to God, God, your lack of response is wearing me down and wearing me out. I am getting to the breaking point. And then he says, God throws me into the mud. I am reduced to dust and ashes. I cry out to you, O God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me and do nothing. He's starting to speak his mind of what he's really feeling towards God. Now, if somebody did that today in the average church, they'd get shut up so fast and ushered out and told you can't do that. And I go, Job was the most righteous man in the world, and that's how he talked to God from his pain. And that encourages me. And he goes on, as surely as God lives, who has denied me justice, the Almighty has made me taste bitterness of soul. So he's saying to God, please show some justice. And God's denied him justice. And then he says, then know that God has wronged me. He has drawn his net around me. Though I cry, I've been wronged, I get no response. Though I call for help, there is no justice. That is a hurting, confused, frustrated, angry man. And you want to know something? At the very end of that book, God speaks to Job. He never is judged for expressing his feelings. When David put all of those into words, God never once criticizes him for putting that into words. And that tells me God's okay with that as long as it is an honest relationship. Now, we're going to go to the next step in a bit, but I want to give you one more. Habakkuk, most of you never heard of him. I like this guy, but here's what he says. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Violence is everywhere. I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds all around me? Why must I watch all this misery? Okay, now then he says this. I will climb up on my watchtower and stand at my guard post. There I will wait to see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. You need to understand that in a context in the history. So picture a 2-year-old child that crosses their arm and stamps their foot. That's what he is saying. I'm going to climb up on my watchtower and stand on my post and wait for you to give me an answer. He's pouting. He is angry at God, and he is saying, I am demanding an answer. That God responded to. And God moved him from that. A while ago, we looked at Jonah being angry at God. And in John 11, Mary and Martha are angry at Jesus that he didn't come and rescue Lazarus before he died. So those are all the people who are angry at God. And what, again, want you to understand is it was good for them to express that. So complex trauma says never honestly express. Therefore, don't honestly express your emotions to God. You can change that. God is not your angry father. God wants an honest relationship with us, and he knows that much that he does won't make sense to us, and we will be hurt and angry, and we will be confused. Now I'm going to show you where we go next, okay? So I'm not saying get angry at God and stay angry forever. Be angry at God, express it, but then I'm going to take you back to the very journals that I read from about anger at God. So back to Psalm 22 where he said, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why aren't you helping me? Then he says this, but you are holy. And what he means is this. I know from history and from getting to know you and watching you that you've never made a mistake. So I'm pretty sure you're not making a mistake now. I'm just not understanding what you're doing. So that means that you have a bigger perspective on life than I have. I only see it from down here. You see it from up there in light of all kinds of facts I know nothing about. And I know from history, not only do you never make mistakes, but you have perfect wisdom. Your perception is never distorted, so mine must be the distorted perception right now. Therefore, I will trust you. And that's where they go. Psalm 13, I will trust in your unfailing love. Not only do you not make mistakes, not only do you have perfect wisdom and a perfect perspective, you have perfect love. You never want to hurt me in a way that is destructive. I will trust your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he's good. In Psalm 42, he says, why are you so depressed, O my soul? Trust in God. Then it says, for I will yet praise him. And what he is saying is, I'm struggling to praise him now. I will trust him now, knowing that one day I will praise him again. And that Psalm 42 also says, why am I discouraged? I will put my hope in God, my Savior. And then I want you to understand, trusting God when I am confused and hurt and angry, I vented that. Now I go, you're smarter than me. You never make mistakes. You have a perfect perspective, and I know you love me. I choose to trust you. I don't feel trust for you. I feel betrayed right now, but that's my limbic brain talking. Out of my cortex brain, I'm going to make a choice to trust that you are going to work this out in your plan somehow to bless me. I choose to trust you, even though I don't see evidence in my circumstances. I see evidence in history that you always work for good. So I choose to trust you right now. So what did they do? They expressed it. Then they thought God is holy. And they processed who God is. And they ended up saying, I can trust him. I choose to trust him, even though I don't feel like it. That's from last week. So that is, no, that was from last week. So that is anger at God. So hopefully, what I'm hoping from this talk tonight, you will go, whew, that's a breath of fresh air. I know I have anger at God. I've been denying it. And what I found in dealing with clients over the years is that most have more anger at God than they even realize until they start to get honest about it. And then they begin to go, wow, I am furious at God. And then they go, now what do I do with it? And that's where I go, express it, get it out, be honest about it, validate it, but don't stop there. Now let's start processing it in light of God. And hopefully, eventually, you'll get to a point where you say, okay, God, I choose to trust. And what I have found in my own life, and I have been angry at God many times, and there have been many times I have been tempted to close my heart to God and walk away from him. I have been so angry. But as I've sat in it and processed it, I have said I choose to trust, and you all know I have never been disappointed that I chose to trust. He's always worked a plan that I didn't see, but a plan that was beyond what I could have ever imagined. And I hope that will be